Well, I have just completed the 26th hour of this week's 64-hour fast, which means getting there, a little over a third of the way, and all of a sudden, it's really hit me. The feeling tired has really hit me. Usually that takes a little bit longer. Granted, it probably doesn't help that I didn't sleep the greatest last night, but I've been enjoying it nevertheless. Right now I can tell I feel a little worn down, but I want to make a habit of doing these videos when I do the fast, because fasts give you so much to talk about, and they involve so many different angles and things that you can learn. I practice for physical health reasons, for spiritual reasons, for mental and emotional reasons, and all of these you can really get into some depth on. Some magical and left-hand path reasons. So we got plenty of material and a lot of things that we can talk about. I've typed up some notes. I thought one thing I'd like to try. I've been wanting to get through the Fung Jimmy Moore Complete Guide to Fasting. And I thought, I might try going through a chapter a week and just kind of summarizing some things as I find them. And I found something really interesting in chapter 1, What is Fasting? Seems like a pretty straightforward answer to a pretty straightforward question. Not eating. Not eating on purpose. They did make a point of distinguishing between starvation, which happens involuntarily, and fasting, which happens entirely voluntarily. But besides that distinction, they went into some interesting things, such as what happens when we eat, and we do that a lot, especially in this country and in this time. And what happens when we fast, when we don't eat? So he mentioned, and I'll break eye contact here for a fair amount of the time, just because I've got them typed up here, and unfortunately I don't have anyone to animate these, and I don't know how at the moment. So for right now, this may not top the lot for the most visually appealing and fun videos, but hopefully you'll find it informative. He mentioned that when we eat, we take in more energy than we burn in the act of eating, and in so doing, we end up having to store some of that energy for later use. And the means by which we do that comes in the form of the hormone insulin. Now, when we store this energy, that can happen in two ways. It happens in two ways. First, it can get stored in the liver as glycogen. The thing about that, the liver has a limited capacity for glycogen. And so once that capacity has been met, according to Fung and Moore, the creation of fat takes place outside of the liver. Now, this will become an important point in a few minutes. The liver only holds enough glycogen to last for about 24 hours, give or take. But once it's reached its max, then we start to get some of this fat, abdominally and in other areas. Now, something I found interesting as well Fung points out some differences between the usual American diet of the 1970s, when he was growing up, and our contemporary time. He mentions that when he was growing up, the typical, and this was supported by research, not just his recollections, but the typical American diet went something like this. You did eat 3 meals a day. You probably started in the morning, perhaps around 8 o'clock, and you would close out around 6 or 7. Big difference between then and now. There weren't constant snacks throughout the day. There wasn't breakfast, then your mid-morning snack, then your late-morning snack, then your lunch, then your afternoon snack, then your dinner, then your after-dinner snack, and probably a right-before-bed one. They were eating 3 times a day. They were staying busy and occupied, presumably doing other things, and they were balancing. They were fairly balanced in their eating, their 10 hours, and their fasting. They're not eating for about 14 hours, especially when you include the sleep time. We see a contrast here today. Now, one thing he noted, the obesity problem wasn't as big a problem in the 1970s, when this sort of diet was, when this sort of eating fasting balance was in effect. But today we see the issue of obesity and the many, many ailments and health issues that come along with it. He mentioned several: heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, fatty liver disease, cystic ovaries, gout, gastroesophageal reflux, cancer. These all have a connection to obesity. We have an obesity problem, and Fung and Moore suggest very strongly that part of that problem, a major part of that problem, comes from our constant eating. The constant eating doesn't have as much to do with the caloric intake, according to these fellows, as the constancy of the insulin production and the subsequent endless storing of the energy. And of course, our diets have a lot of carbs. Those process a little differently than some other things like the fats, and that can cause some additional issues. But then, of course, they discuss what happens when we don't eat, when we fast. There was a 5-stage process discussed. The first was actually, we could call it pre-fasting, feeding, resulting in the rising of insulin and the storage of glycogen or fat, which we've already discussed. Then we have the post-absorptive phase. Now, this occurs from 6 to 24 hours after beginning a fast, which means I was in this for about the last day, and may still remain in this for a little bit of time, give or take. But in this phase, the blood sugar and the insulin both begin to drop, and the liver has begun to work on that stored glycogen. Now, if the liver stores glycogen for about 24 hours worth, I've just gotten past that and entered the 3rd stage, and the stage that I probably will stay in for the duration of this fast, which should only last about 64 hours. The glucogenesis. Basically, the glycogen has been depleted. Then 2 to 3 days, so I plan to do 64 hours, which means I'll get a little bit of stage 4 ketosis. Ketosis begins breaking down the fat stored outside of the liver. And this breakdown, according to Fung and Moore, allows for the feeding of the various tissues and organs apart from the brain. The brain relies on something which makes sense, called ketones. They said that the production of ketones during ketosis, it can go up some 70-fold. Quite a jump. And I was speculating, they didn't cover this in the book, at least not yet, but I was speculating that that should account for the mental clarity. Even right now, I feel very tired. You can probably see my eyelids just want to weigh down. But my brain, I've got it going. And I would guess, not being anything even close to a medical expert, that has at least something to do with these ketones being produced at heightened rates. Finally, you reach, after 5 days, the protein conservation phase, where human growth hormone gets increased. This maintains muscle mass and lean tissue. So that business about, you go into fasting and it'll just eat up all your muscles, actually not quite true. The body has a mechanism in place to defend against that. And it makes sense, because we haven't always eaten like we do now. We haven't even always eaten like we used to in the 70s. Prehistoric man presumably went for extended periods without, gorging on another cheeseburger, It also, this protein conservation phase also results in some increased adrenaline, which prevents the metabolic decrease. So 2 myths kind of shot down in just this 5-phase process, because people also will say, well, if you start fasting, your metabolism will go down, and it'll actually act counterproductively, because once you start eating, the body's metabolism will have decreased, and you'll end up storing it all back or more. These guys, Fung and Moore, have a different outlook. We think of dieting. If somebody wants to do this just for pure weight loss and health reasons, they certainly can. We have this idea that of the infallibility of the eat less, move more procedure. But they actually say that doesn't have as much to do with it as the duration of time that you allow yourself to eat in a given day. Hence their interest in intermittent fasting at the very least. So bottom line for this part of chapter 1, if we balance eating with the fasting state on a regular basis, we burn more energy than we will have to store, and we don't gain weight. And then, of course, if we don't gain weight, we get away from the obesity problem, and that can work. This, according to these guys, this can work to help prevent that litany of diseases and problems that I had summarized earlier, and who knows what else. Now, not to mention some of the other benefits that I've discussed in previous videos that deal with a more mental, emotional, and even metaphysical context. So definitely an interesting practice. If you have an interest in doing something like this, I would suggest getting a hold of this book, read that through, get some plans in place, and give it a go. Of course, I don't recommend it without also consulting the necessary physicians and people who can help you determine what you can and can't handle. But definitely an interesting, self-engaging process that contributes to one's awareness of oneself in a variety of ways and their own transformation. So if you've found this interesting, you have additional thoughts, please leave them in the comments section. I love discussion. Furthermore, subscribe, subscribe, follow me on my other platforms. I'll have the Instagram information and Facebook in the description below. Follow me there. I don't always get to do as many videos as I'd like, but I do post on those pretty regularly about a wide variety of subjects. Lately, it's been pretty focused on the fasting and tarot, but that'll surely expand in the near future. So until next time, rest up and enjoy your night or day whenever you watch this. Keep transforming, and we'll see each other soon.